All right, hello everybody. It seems there's another talk going on. I don't know if you have heard about it, about Dwarf Fortress, so yeah, that explains. But thank you for coming to this talk. The idea is to talk a bit about my journey through the development of quite a bunch of roguelikes that I have been developing through the years, and basically the experience that I have had there, and maybe how it could help you finish your games. How many of you are roguelike developers? All right, quite a bunch. So yeah, I'm going to just start because time is pretty short. What happened here? Later? Is it the end? So thank you for coming.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right. So this was me when I started doing roguelikes, like about 15 years ago or something like that. I still don't have like a big roguelike, right? Like a famous roguelike that thousands of people are playing. But so what I want to share is this experience that I have had and how it could help you probably. So yeah, you can find all my games at slashy.net. There's a huge list there that I have put. And so I started around 2003, 2004, when I went to the college. So by that time, I was able to play ADOM, right? And it really inspired me into doing roguelikes. And at first, I tried to do like replicate what ADOM is, and especially Jade, which was the project that Thomas Beast could help by that time. So I wanted to create like a very complex simulator of the medieval fantasy, right? So like a complete world that you could play on. And that's what I went in for at first, right? And it was, I did not have the experience to carry that, but I jumped straight into it. By then, we had the Usenet roguelike development channel. It was like the primary communication channel that we had. And I was not alone. There was a lot of people that was trying to do just that, right? Like you recreate like the very complex simulation of a world. But we were not really thinking on doing a game, right? We were thinking on doing like a sandbox where you could like play and then the game will rise. So I played, I worked a long time on that, like trying to get that done until I got to the 7-day roguelike challenge, which was like a turning point for me. That was around 2005. So in this talk, I want to talk about all the different 7-day roguelikes that I have done, right? And how each one of these kind of taught me something that I could use in the next one. And finally, in my current project, which is Ananias, and how it may help to you too for this. All right, so the first one I made was Castlevania Roguelike. I actually developed it further after the 7-day roguelike challenge. And so I had been working already for like 2 years on the other one and still didn't manage to produce anything. So I jumped into the challenge thinking that it was like a waste of time because 7 days is very little time. So, but in the end, I managed to ship a game. Well, it was a game. It was playable. It was not very fun. It was not very complete. But I managed to like say, hey, this is my game. I finally made a game. And I think that's a very important step, like being able to ship something, because else you just keep working and working on demos or technical stuff and never get feedback from anyone. So another thing that I learned for this one is that I could focus in a single feature that was fun. And for example, this one didn't even have procedural generation. So it was like more of an, well, it had ASCII art, so that looked a bit like a roguelike, but it didn't have a lot of other factors. But still, it's like an initial step. So I think that's a good thing that you can do is like have a work incrementally, right? Like having a first iteration of your game and then continue developing on it. Next year, I did Drash Roguelike, which is based on the very old Ultima game, which is called Escape from Mount Drash. the first thing I did there is that I reutilized the code from Castlevania, and this time I did include procedural generation. So it was like a more close to what a roguelike really is. Another thing that I did for this one is I established some design guidelines from the beginning, so I knew what I wanted, right? So I had a plan instead of just trying to do and see what can come up. I knew from the beginning that I didn't want to have experience points, didn't have to be grinding or doing that stuff, and that everything was going to be like without commands, without menus, without anything like that. So that also helps a bit. And actually for this one, I had a completely different plan by the beginning of the challenge. I wanted to create like a simulator of an ant colony. So you could like be an ant fighter and defend the colony from invaders or something like that. And in the end, well, I did some research on the different types of ants, and I could not find like a way to make it like into a funny mechanic, right? So I changed what I was planning to do and ended up with like just a survival arena. It worked much better. So this one was actually very fun to play, unlike Castlevania Roguelike, which was not very good. Then the same year, I created another one, which was called Metroid Roguelike. And this one, I think what I did was, again, reutilizing the code, but I really invested a lot of time in the world generation. So this is, in this one, I created like a base, so similar to the Metroid games, and you had to explore the different areas of the base and find a power-up, and then go to another part of the base and use that power-up, so it was like backtracking, and it was randomly generated. So I think that one's pretty good. I also included like additional features which, apart from procedural generation, which were like the pseudo 3D. So it was still an overhead view, but each cell had a different height. So you could jump and get into different parts of the world. And finally, another thing that I included was the background music, which I think is maybe it was present in other games, but I think Doom Roguelike was like the first one to like really innovate with that, and I think it's a huge help, like to create a mood for the games. So as you can see, I was like reutilizing or using existing universes, so Castlevania, Ultima, Metroid, and that helped, of course, like to get the music, because I could go into internet and find it, and without having to have an artist for it. So that's also very helpful. Next year, I had Zelda Roguelike. Again, I worked more on the procedural generator. I added like an overworld generator, which generated like forests and lakes and mountains based on the dungeon that you were going to explore, and also created like more complex dungeon generator. So again, like incrementally going, so that I could be adding new complexity. It was, it was complete, but it was a bit unbalanced. And the thing here is, yeah, as I told you, I think including elements for a really established universe like Zelda or Metroid or Castlevania, of course, helps you get people into the game and gets you feedback. And I think the most important thing up to this point is learning, right? So maybe initially you want to create like a huge game to have people like you have a vision and you want people to experience what you want, but you still don't know how to make a good game, right? So you can end up like walking in circles, like trying to make the game while you still don't really know how to make a game. So this, I think the way that I did it allowed me to learn, to get feedback, and to like move on, right? Because these games were, most of them, I developed them for the 7-day roguelike challenge and then forgot about them. So they were like more like learning experiences, so I was not completely invested into them, with a few exceptions, but they were more like a one-time thing that I will get some experience, also develop some algorithm that I could reutilize later in other projects, but mainly the experience was the part. So if you are using an existing universe, you can get feedback from the players, and that helps you like become better in game design and in the programming itself. Next year, Megaman Roguelike. I tried to create a side-scrolling turn-based roguelike. It didn't end up very well because it was pretty complex, so you didn't know what was going on. Since it was turn-based, so when you jump, you stand in the air, and then you pass your turn, and you continue going up like another tile, and then you fall back again. And then you can shoot with your armor cannon, but the bullets don't immediately go. They are also objects in the world. So you have to keep track and try to hit your enemies, like calculating when they're going to hit. It was, I had the idea to do it, and that's the point of this one, experimenting with stuff, right? Sometimes you have an idea and you think it's great, but it ended not being that great like in reality. So yeah, experimentation, I think it's also important, but again, experimenting in a small scale so you can, all right, that was a failure, complete failure, let's move on and forget that it happened. So, yeah. All right, 2009 was Expedition. This one was based on 7 Cities of Gold and colonization, which are like games about creating a colony in the new world. This one I really want. This is also an idea that I had for a while, and I decided to try to do it in the 7-day roguelike challenge, but it was huge, right? So it was impossible to have it done by that time. I didn't manage to implement the procedural generation, so we just had like a high-resolution map that you could travel around and put the settlements on. So another lesson here was to watch out for the scope, right? Especially, I mean, if you're starting, you want to like go with small iterations. 2010 was Ruler. It was similar to Expedition, but it was more like the influence was more from Civilization. So you had like a civilization that you could advance through the different ages and create more powerful units. And the lesson I got from this one was that you need to really invest into play testing, right? I didn't get to play test until the very last, and it ended up being completely broken, right? So you could get into the space age very quickly, and then the game was broken. So I implemented a lot of infrastructure, right? Like technically you could like create cities, create roads between them, trade, do a lot of stuff. But the game itself, I mean, trying to play the game was completely broken. So, and you don't want to create that right? You want your games to be playable. So playtesting, like having some friends help you playtest your game. Now, well, we have internet, we have like a easier way to connect with people and have that happen because, well, you want to make the best use of your time, right? And if what you do is developing, then you really need someone to help you test. 2011, right, was Elite International Detective. This one was like influenced by Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. So it was supposed to be like a roguelike, but you were traveling the world and trying to find Carmen Sandiego, but you found like detectives that would shoot you down. So you had guns and you had to kill them actually and try to find her. And this one, what was missing was quality content, right? So all the engine was there. I managed to test it, right? It worked. It was stable, but I didn't have in mind the quantity of content that was required to make this interesting. So, for example, in this one, well, I needed like a database of cities and countries and like features from this country so that it would be interesting, like trying to find the clues to get to the next country, and I didn't have that. Even though I had someone try to help me, so it didn't happen. So in the end, the experience that people had was not very good. 2012 was Hope. I tried, as you can see, all of the previous one were console mode, right? So only characters. So for the first time, I tried doing graphics, but I didn't have, I am not a pixel artist, and I did not have like a good pixel artist. So yeah, you need to have like someone skilled, because else it didn't have pretty well. It was not very aesthetically pleasing, right? And if you're going for graphics, you need it to be pleasing. I think so, because if you're doing just like a console mode, well, we know that what kind of players will play, right? And they have the imagination to think what's going on and to fill the gaps. But if you are going for graphics, you are targeting a much larger audience, and they have different expectations, so they expect to be more clear what's going on. So there's no, I mean, going for a middle ground is not going to be please anyone. So yeah. All right, so up to this time, I had used Java, and I have not had like a lot of exposure because it was hard for people to run the games. So in 2013, I started doing JavaScript games. This one was the first. Name was Rodney. So the lesson here was like, yeah, I had to close that cycle, because really, I mean, I had learned a lot, and everything I learned was very useful for me for my professional life, right, everything. But really, that wasn't working for games. So I closed that cycle and decided to change things. And actually in Rodney, the bosses of the dungeon are Glenn, Ken, and also Michael, who is not here. So if you can go all the way down to the dungeon, you have to kill them to win. So good luck. Other things that I included in this one was a single action button. So there are no commands. You just move around and use a single action button. And it's all based on the skills. So for example, moving around, you trigger the skills. If you have the wall jump skill, you just run into a wall, and then it gets triggered when you actually run into it. Yeah, so that was also an important thing there, the recapitulation, simplification. So I just went through like all my previous games or game efforts and tried to see, okay, so let's see what's good in this. And let's try to get some features from there that work, simplify them, and bring them into something new. So that's what I did. Another important point here is accessibility. Again, my previous games were not very accessible, and I think that's a goal that I put myself, like make my following games accessible. 2014 was Ananias, the 7-day roguelike version. It was made for touch devices. Yeah, it was like my first mobile game, and it was also the first time that I decided to use a library instead of like trying to do everything from scratch. So I think the lesson for this one was like creating an experience target to a specific platform, right? Basically, I did it because there were no good mobile games, mobile roguelikes. I don't know if any of you has developed a mobile roguelike, but it's very different than doing a roguelike for desktop, right? So the ports we had for roguelikes were very difficult to play because you had a lot of commands. It was not made for that. I'm going to just move this here. So yeah, I found that that was like something that needed to be done better, and went for it. 2015, Stygian Abyss. So first time I teamed with someone to do the 7-day roguelike challenge. He basically did all the 3D display code. It was a 3D dungeon crawler. And I did the dungeon generation, which was based on Ultima Underworld. So it generates levels like similar to Ultima Underworld. We had a hard time getting the graphics. So you can get an artist on board, you will be in much better shape. And I really had a lot of fun doing the procedural generator. So I think one thing here is like focusing on what you can really provide the most value, right? So teaming up with someone, getting an artist, having someone working the display code, you can work in a different component of the game. It ended up pretty well, but again, it was not very fun. it was fancy because, I mean, I don't know if any of you has played Ultima Underworld. So, yeah, that game was like very important for me. And it creates levels like Ultima Underworld. But yeah, so they are empty because you don't have a plot. And what you have to do in the game is like explore these huge levels and try to find a single tile, which is the stairway to the next level. And you can easily get lost. So I also stuck to, I had like this idea that getting lost is good, right? And that players should not complain about it, but rather try not to. So for example, people suggested that I add in an auto map, right? And I say, no, I don't want to, I will not do that because that will break what I want, like my vision for the game. But it made the game like unplayable, right? Because yeah, no one will like wander around for 2 hours in a single level looking for a tile, right? Like a small tile, and also the dungeon is dark. So, so yeah, you gotta listen sometimes to people if you want to make a game that someone else will play. I mean, I play it and I have the patience to go through, but most people won't do that. Finally, this year I made this one. It's made for smartwatches, so yeah, exploring new medias and new technologies. I was thinking on either doing that or virtual reality, but I didn't know, didn't have like the technological stack to do the VR. So it's a simple game that you can play in your smartwatch. It's like a very simplified version of the roguelike formula, but it works well. I mean, if you're waiting for your bus or something, you can just try to get as far as you can in the tower. So yeah, that's like the story. I think I'm running out of time. Finally, for the future, Ananias is what I'm working on. So I evolved it from 2014, and I am almost ready to hit Steam. So I think the most important lesson is like being able to stand in one point of time and looking back and seeing, okay, so I've done all this. I will take all the lessons I have learned and I will apply them to my new projects instead of like keeping like doing the same again and again, because it's very easy, I think, to fall into the trap of never releasing and keeping working on your game. So yeah, you're welcome to keep in touch, and Ananias is already available, so you can download it for Android and iOS. Not iOS yet, but soon. But you can download for Android and desktop, and we'll be releasing soon in Steam. So that's the idea, to do it the next month. It's a roguelike that keeps the spirit of the classic roguelike. So it's turn-based, permanent. What's the new name? Consequence persistence, fully certified by the original developers of Rogue. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share. I don't know if you have any questions.
So after 13 times of having a development cycle that lasts 7 days, how do you feel like you should divide up the 7 days? How much time in design, development, testing, playtesting?
Okay.
So could you watch it?
Yeah, so after this whole participation on the 7-day roguelike challenge, how do I think that I should split like those 7 days into the different kinds of tasks to release something that is good? I think it's important to have time for playtesting, so that usually I keep like the last day for that, like to do playtesting, excuse me, and doing any tweaks that are needed. You need at least 2 days for data, right? Like to put interesting data, monster data, items, quest. So that is going to be like an important, like a fun game. And yeah, I mean, it's a very short span of time. So the rest of the time you have to be coding. Especially for the first time that you participate, the result is not going to be very good, but the important part is the experience of like having this compressed development cycle, because developing a game normally takes much longer, right? But you are compressing everything into 7 days, so you can have the experience of having developed a whole game, forgetting that, moving on to the next. So you can like gain those skills more quickly. Yeah.
So when you do this process and you look back at the end, after a week after, do you have a structure for the way that you distill like what the good parts of it, things that you maybe use, or like you just kind of intuitively gain that knowledge?
Well, I think that the important point there is listening to what people think, right? So that's like my main source of finding out what worked and what didn't work, the feedback that I got from the players. And that's also an important part of the 7DRL is that you get a lot of feedback, especially in recent years, like about 4 years, the last 4 years, we have had a lot of exposure. So there's been like, I don't know, about 200 and more entries. And there's a lot of people like looking into your games. So that helps you like get the feedback. And I think that's like the most important metric.
All right.
All right. Thank you.